Welcome to Some Stutter Luh, Newfoundland and Labrador's first podcast about living with communication differences. It is a production of the Communication Collaborative and is in solidarity with the Newfoundland and Labrador Stuttering Association. My name is Greg O'Grady. I'm a person who stutters and your host. Some Stutter Luh is a unique opportunity for us to discuss topics, experiences, and perspectives on what it is like to live with communication differences. If you only get one thing from this podcast, we hope it's this. It's okay to stutter and it's okay to communicate differently. It's not how we communicate that's important, it's the message that's important. So let's communicate differently without the need to ask permission or to apologize for being you. For more information about the Communication Collaborative or this podcast, you can find us at somestutterluh.ca. Today, Some Stutter Luh welcomes Miriam Choji. Thank you, Miriam, for joining us for a Some Stutter Luh conversation today, and welcome to the Some Stutter Luh team. Now, a little about Miriam. Miriam obtained her MA in Linguistics from the Institute of Humanities and Cultural Studies in Iran, and she will begin Masters in Linguistics at Memorial University this year. She is interested in how culture impacts the experience of stuttering. Miriam interviews people who stutter in Iran and hopes to shed light on the social and cultural dimensions of stuttering, providing valuable insights for people who stutter, their families, and the broader community. She feels that being a member of the Some Stutter Luh team will lead to cultural and social awareness that can help to reduce stigma and eventually increase the quality of life for people who stutter. So, Miriam, would you introduce today's special episode of Some Stutter Luh?
Hi, Greg. Thank you so much for having me as a guest in this special episode of Some Stutter Luh. And it's a great honor for me to collaborate with you and other team members. And today we're going to talk about stuttering, but from a cultural and social point of view. As the stuttering is a fixed issue around the world, it is the cultural and social criteria that make the stuttering a different experience for people around the world. So we are going to talk about an interview with Parsa, who lives in Iran, and we are going to talk about his experience as a person in different culture and different language other than English.
Great, Miriam. Um, you know the our listeners would are wondering, I'm sure, why has Some Stutter Luh decided to host a special episode on cultural diversity. And to explain this is that by expanding the scope of Some Stutter Luh, embracing cultural perceptions, diversity, and inclusivity of stuttering is of paramount importance and is a responsibility of Some Stutter Luh, being a voice, advocating, and supporting the global stuttering community. Some Stutter Luh is a voice broadening a public lens of cultural perception, diversity, and inclusivity, creating awareness, education, understanding, and acceptance not only of people who stutter in our province of Newfoundland and Labrador, but supporting the 70 million people worldwide that stutter, bringing awareness that people who stutter can be of any nationality, ethnicity, gender and sexual orientation, religion, or economic status, and that stuttering is not related to intelligence. So, Miriam, what based on your interview and your your history, what are the attitudes of the general public and health professionals to stuttering compared to in Canada?
It is stigmatized, and with negative attitude toward some people who stutter. There is some negative attitude, and the stuttering is always a barrier for them, and it limits their option, whether for education or employment or personal growth.
Miriam, would you share a little bit about Parsa's experience with this?
Parsa's experience. Yeah,
Yeah.
in some part of interview, I asked Parsa about the opportunities that he missed just because of his stuttering, and he pointed to PhD interview that he had. The education system in Iran is when you are going to apply for PhD, you must take part in exam, and after that, if you get a good rank, you are invited to an interview, scientific interview, and in that interview, it's very important, and you may pass or fail for PhD. Parsa told that he was failed because he stuttered, and it has some negative influence in his mind. And also, he told me that he had applied for some jobs, and he couldn't get that job because of stuttering. Stuttering is a reason that he loses some opportunities.
Yeah, and reading your translation here with these interviews, Marianne, Parsha talks about the attitudes of his family, the cultural attitudes towards stuttering. Do you want to share a little bit about that as well?
Yes. Parsa told that he was living in village, and in rural areas, which people don't access to speech therapy services, and the reaction to stuttering is not considering it as disability. It is not a disability to be cured. And he told about his experience, which is very common in Iran. For children who delay to speak or stutter, it is suggested that they should have pigeon's egg, and it is not a scientific way of facing with some problem like stuttering. It's just kind of grandma's remedy. He couldn't start speech therapy in childhood because he didn't access to a speech therapy service. And attitude of his family, he told us his family at first were not aware of this problem, and maybe the awareness of the family is because they have a child who stutter. There is lack of awareness about stuttering in Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Not only for 30 years ago, now Parsa is 38, but also now most of the people don't know how to react, how to behave with a person who stutter.
Looking at Parsa's, Parsa's interview here, he feels, and I'll read his response. Parsa says, stuttering has to be accepted as reality, but we have to remember that it is not born with us. So Parsa feels that he wasn't born a person who stutters, and is not supposed to last forever. But if it does, it's fine. It has been scientifically proven that stuttering is a mistake. Now that's a strong statement from a person who stutters. Okay. A mistake that person repeats so much that it becomes a behavioral pattern. A mistake can be corrected with effort. It takes time. It can be compensated, reduced, and eliminated. Well, he says that while I started for 30 years, I have always said it's just a complication, a mistake I'm making. And if I want to, I can fix it. But he also says that there's one thing that makes stuttering hard, which I, as a person who stutters as well, wholeheartedly support. It's the psychological aspects of stuttering that affects a person's whole personality. It's like a spider's web. If a person gets caught up in it, they must tear all the strings. And Marion, based on your interview with Parsha, do you feel that he's thinking about studying not not it can be fixed? Do you think it's part of his experiences being based on his history?
Um, what I know about him is that he has tried several times to cure his stuttering with different therapists and in different times from high school and up to university, when he was university student. And uh, it seems that he has accepted stuttering as part of his um, character. He told me that he's easy with the unique type of speaking he has. And and the acceptance of stuttering, I think it's a very personal journey. Um, um, I don't know. I think he's okay with the situation he is. You know, that's
Yeah,
okay for
thank.
him to stutter.
Yeah.
It's not something that make him embarrassed, or and cause something that he feels shameful about it.
Good to hear that. Miriam, based on your experience, are there any aspects of studying in Persian that are different from studying in English? For example, in terms of phonetics.
Greg, I have asked from one of my friend who is a speech therapist um, um, about this, but she couldn't explain me, and she couldn't bring a good example for me. She told me that in bilingual cases, she had, for example, Persian-Kurdish or Persian-English cases that have stuttering. And if in their first language, if it is Kurdish, they have more stuttering, and because the speed of their speaking is higher, is faster than in the second language.
Hmm,
But
interesting.
about
Yeah.
phonetics, she couldn't bring an example that I can explain it here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
still waiting for another friend to answer this question.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I mean there's mixed messages because I know a number of people who started that speak different languages as well, like French, and they find that they may stutter less when learning another language, whereas they also speak to other people started saying that they may stutter more when they're trying to speak and learn a different language. So I think it varies from individual. Do you agree,
Mhm. Yes, I
Miriam?
think. Yes, I think it's true.
Now, like in terms of culture and disability, do you feel that there's a difference between culture and disability, like from where you live and Canada? Do you think there's a significant difference? Be-
I have read something about culture and disability. Disability has different definition in different cultures and societies. Although we can define it generally as a condition that an individual is limited in performing some activities, but it varies in different societies. And in the book, um, disability in different cultures, I have read about interesting examples of how cultures define the concept of disability, and how some disabilities are more acceptable in some cultures and societies. And this acceptance is influenced by two factors. The first one is that how a culture explains the appearance of its disability. Based on the explanation in that book, for example, in some societies, um, blindness is caused by sorcery, and they believe that people believe in the society, but mental retardation is believed to happen by chance. So a person who has mental retardation, it is more acceptable in society rather than the other one, the blind one. And the second factor in acceptance of disability is the expectation that a society have from a person who is disabled when they reach adulthood.
Mhm.
Um, for example, in Polynesia, um, uh, the ability to speak eloquently is a way that men can get prestige and power. So if a man have stuttering or some problem such as deafness, it is a great disadvantage for him. But people with other kind of disability and women with this special kind of disability, they don't have, they don't face a lack of social status. And you know, it is on society how it defines the disability that affect the experience of the people based on this book.
Mhm. I feel the same way, Miriam, because there is a tendency in some societies to accept some types of disabilities more readily than others. And when I think about stuttering, there still need to be more awareness, understanding, and acceptance of stuttering, even in our province and worldwide. Because I feel like for example, as you were saying, you know, there's there's more acceptance, more awareness of autism, Downs, Alzheimer's, disabilities such as that. But but I feel personally that the people who stutter are still a underrepresented and marginalized community. Do you feel that's the same way in your culture as well?
Yes, yes, definitely it is. Because most of the time, these people don't engage in social interaction, or sometimes they have some techniques to hide their stuttering, you know. So people are not aware of that, you know. In last couple of weeks, I went to a session, and the speaker was a speech therapist, and also a person who stuttered. He was telling his story, unique story, that he was accepted to a speech therapy major, and when he told the professors about his experience, um, they couldn't believe, because he always hide and or avoid speaking in some situation that he predict that he would stutter, and you know, he told that, and that's a pity that in that level, the professor even told me that it's better to change your major, because nobody trusts a person who stutter to be a therapist, you know. It shows that
Okay.
even in that level, there is not enough awareness about stuttering, and a person who stutter, how should be behave. No.
Now, would you be able to elaborate as to why this professor felt that no one would trust a speech language pathologist who stutters? Would you be able to share a little bit more about that?
Yes, he explained it very elaborately. He told that, for example, imagine if I stutter during the therapy session, maybe the parents of the child who stutter, they never take them to a speech therapy, because if speech therapy was useful, it would work on me myself, you know.
I see. And
Mm.
so, really, this brings up the issue of, you know, parents as well as clients understanding of,
Mhm.
why people go to speech therapy. Is their expectations want to be 100% fluency, the parents as well as the clients, or is it a, a goal of managing one stutter? And because with me as a person who stutters, I remember when I went for therapy, my ultimate goal was fluency. I wanted to be fluent because I felt that once my stuttering was quote unquote fixed, all my issues and problems would disappear. Whereas as I'm older, more mature, I hope that I put more emphasis on looking for uh, areas to help me manage my stuttering because personally I feel there's no cure for stuttering. So I think much like I feel a speech and I feel for speech language pathologists because I think that they're challenged a lot with clients and families coming to them that I want you to fix my son, my child. I want them to be fluent. So would you like to share some thoughts about that?
Yes, you know, in last couple of weeks, I had opportunity to observe some speech therapy sessions, and I see the exact scene you were explaining. You know, um, uh, the case was a 6-year-old girl, and her mother was objecting that she hadn't made any progress in speaking. When the speech therapist, who was my friend, he showed the record, I saw that the last session that the child was in that speech therapy center was 4 months ago. Uh, some parents expect their children to be fluent, but they don't accompany or follow the speech therapy plan as they should, you know. And it
Mm-hmm.
is the part of difficulty for it is a difficult part for a speech therapist to convince the parents that it should be continuous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there is more work that needs to be done in terms of education, understanding the whole goals of speech therapy for families and clients. Marion,
Yes.
I'm just thinking back about our conversation about our understanding of disability. But people started we're on sort of the 50-50 feeling about is stuttering a disability. You have 50% of the stuttering community that says that stuttering is not a disability. You have others that stuttering is a disability. Now, based on your understanding at this point, what are your thoughts? Do you feel, or is this a fair question? Do you feel stuttering is a disability or is it not a disability?
Oh, it's very difficult question to answer.
Yeah.
Especially when I'm not a person who is stuttering and I don't experience it. But I think maybe it depends on the stage of stuttering for everyone. If it is a minor one, a person can manage it sometimes, and they can use the techniques they have learned to cover this stuttering. But if it is a severe one, you know, it is disability because it really affects many aspects of a person's life.
Definitely, definitely, yeah. And I'm thinking, thinking about your interview with Parsa. I mean, based on what he shared, he was very transparent and very forthright with his first experiences, but he has gone through a lot himself in terms of, being undervalued, discriminated against. But he feels, based on my sense and what you were saying, that he's very comfortable with his starting at this point, where he is at this where he is at this point in his life. Would you agree with that?
Yes, as I, you know, Parsa, I make friend with Parsa several years ago on Instagram, and every time we text each other, I didn't know that he stutter because we never call each other, we never talk in person. And when I was searching for someone who stutter, some of my friends suggested Parsa. And, at first it was very difficult for me to invite him because I was thinking that maybe he would be sad if I point to stuttering, because some people think that stuttering is a weakness or a sign of incompetence. But his behavior was very nice. He accepted my invitation, and also he's eager to be our guest in another episode. He's going to talk
Wonderful.
about stuttering as a linguist. He's a linguist.
Mm. Miriam, before we close now, would you remind our listeners about why this special topic is so important for some sort of law?
You know, and before I joined to Some Stutter Luh, I have listened to an episode in a podcast in Persian, um, and it was about stuttering. And I there was some guests, and there were some guests in that episode, and all of them live in Iran, and one of them immigrated to Canada, and he explained that how everything is going to be good after immigration for him, you know. So I was um, I was thinking what is the difference between the setting that make an experience very different for a person inside Iran and outside it. So I think the culture and the society, the norms, the laws, you know, and the policies in a country, all of them affect the life of people, especially the people who live with different differences, whether it is communication differences or other differences.
Do you feel that we both cultures have similar challenges in terms of education, understanding, raising awareness of stuttering? We still have similar experiences trying to move forward with acceptance of stuttering.
Yeah, but there is a difference, Greg. Um, as a United Nations Convention about Human Rights, all the people, whether they are normal or some people with disability, they have the same rights, you know. And in many countries, their laws and policies are in a way that protect the rights of all the people, regardless of their disability, their differences. For example, in some countries, there are anti-discrimination laws that prohibit the discrimination. But in our society, in Iran, the people, the lawgivers, don't consider the right of people with a disability as it should be. This year, the government has reduced the budget which is allocated for people with disability. It affects their lives in a negative way. They limit their life, and their right is not respected.
Well, Maureen, thank you very much for being part of the this some sort of law conversation today. And I've learned a lot about different side to stuttering. Listening to you about the cultural diversity differences in various countries on stuttering. And so as I mentioned before, we welcome you as part of the Some Stutter Luh team. And would you also would you also extend our appreciation to Parsa for taking the time to be part of the conversation as well?
Oh, thank you
Okay,
so much. It
thank
has been
you.
a pleasure for me to talk to you.
Okay, and vice versa. Thank you very much. So
Thank you so much.
Marina, we'll close now, and but we still have much more to talk about, because really listening to you, we've only touched the surface of the iceberg here when it comes to cultural diversity differences. So we will need to have more episodes on this.